Good morning, everyone. How did we enjoy our breakout sessions this morning? They were good? I know mine was great, so I hope you all enjoyed and engaged in some meaningful conversations. I just wanted to preface before we start our panel, was asked to, I'm sure you maybe saw this person walking around, but there is a photographer that will be taking photos throughout the day today, and that will be used to promote the conference and Villanova's Offices of Sustainability in the future. So if you do not wish to be featured in any of these images, please let the photographer know, and we will exclude you from those pictures. Thank you very much. So now we will introduce our next panel, which promises to be a thoughtful and engaging discussion. I know it will leave you inspired and informed. This session is titled Socially Responsible Research in Business and Economics. So let's give a warm welcome to our panelists, please. So joining us today, we have Dr. Jonathan Doe, who is the Senior Associate Dean for Research, Faculty Advancement, and Global Engagement, and the Herbert G. Ramrath Endowed Chair in International Business. He's also a Professor of Management and Operations at the Villanova School of Business. Welcome, Jonathan. Dr. Chris Jeffords, who is our Associate Teaching Professor of Economics at the Villanova School of Business, joining us today. And Dr. Svenja Dube, Associate Professor of Accounting at the Zicklin School of Business in Baruch College. And lastly, serving as today's moderator of this panel, Dr. Manuela Priesemuth, Associate Professor of Management and Operations, Faculty Director of Ethics and Social Responsibility at the Villanova School of Business. Manuela, I'll let you take it away. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello? This works terrifically. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the business session of the conference. We were tasked with creating a panel that tells us a little bit about what sort of sustainability-related research might look like in the School of Business. I know there might be expectations of, businesses and corporations sort of working in that area. And we came up with the panel that might give you different insights about various disciplines in business. We have Svenja Dube from accounting, so she's able to talk a little bit about research in the financial reporting with respect to ESG specifically. We have Chris Jeffords from the economics department, so we get some insights about economically related research and sustainability-related research there. And we have Dr. Jonathan Doe, who is giving us insights about management and international business. So 3 different areas, and hopefully it gives you a holistic approach of what's going on in business schools. To get us started, I thought it would be a good idea to ask the panelists sort of what their own research perhaps has looked like in the past. What were some of the first questions they've looked at with respect to sustainability or corporate social responsibility, and give us sort of an insight of what research has looked like in the past, so we're at a good starting point before we're thinking about what are some of the cutting edge research topics in the future. I feel like I'm cutting in or out. Everybody okay, hearing me okay? Okay, and so without further ado, I'll open up the panel to ask perhaps Svenja at first, if you could talk a little bit about what accounting research has looked like in the past and sort of the evolution maybe up to this point, maybe some of your own research.
So I just do want to say that if I say any of these acronyms, please recognize it's kind of the same thing as sustainability, it's just the language that is more common to me. And that's kind of the starting point, I think, if you think back, maybe not 5 years, but maybe 10 years ago, I think the accounting literature, when they looked at sustainability, they called it corporate social responsibility. donations that do firms do more than just pure profit maximization? Do they consider other stakeholder groups than just shareholders, right? At that point, I was maybe a PhD student. I did not do research in this area. I think the main reason was it was considered kind of esoteric at that time in accounting, right? It was like, we are accountants. We look at financial statements. We look at the impact of leasing or revenue or something like that, right? So CSR, it did happen. There were papers that were published at that time. I was not one of them, okay? And I think it really picked up, I would say, maybe in the last 5 years, definitely in the last 2 to 3 years. We'll get to what is cutting edge right now, so I'll keep that for the later questions. But I think the first way that I got into this research was about 5 years ago, and it wasn't really planned. I started off, I looked at Glassdoor as an equity review platform, and I wanted to know how do firms respond to that? Do they change their corporate culture? Do they change their corporate practices in response to that? Little did I know that that was considered CSR at the time. And just through the research project, I realized, oh yeah, I'm pulling all these typical CSR databases. It's like ESG rating agencies, but also sustainability reports that you might be all familiar with, and looking at do firms change their disclosures in these sustainability reports in response to Glassdoor reviews by employees, pretty much. So that was kind of my entrance into the ESG CSR area, and since then I've never looked back. That's all I've been doing ever since, because I find it a fascinating area with a lot of unanswered questions. Now, these days I moved into how does the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, enforce environmental disclosures by companies, because they do have to provide this information to the extent that they're financially material, meaning that they're impacting firm value, right? And anything that impacts firm value is of interest to investors, and the SEC's role is to kind of protect those investors. And guess what? The political landscape matters, so that's what that project finds. It finds that if there's a Democratic president, the SEC is more likely to enforce environmental disclosures than if there's a Republican president. I have many more research projects. I'm happy to talk about those offline. I'll pass it along.
All right, hello. Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. It's great to be here. So I'm a bit of a non-traditional economist, you could argue. I started at the University of Connecticut, and I was part of a group there. I was in the Ag Econ department for my graduate studies, and I was part of an economic and social rights group there. And there were a couple of folks, political scientists, anthropologists, sociologists, working on environmental issues and environmental rights issues, and in particular, rights related to clean air, clean water, things having to do with, just basic ecosystem services, so rights of nature. And as an economist, that really sparked my interest because I was already interested in environmental things. I was already interested in ecological things, and climate change research and ideas were already kind of on my agenda moving forward. So I started to look at the impacts of constitutional rights and laws on environmental outcomes. And that has been the sole focus of the things that I've been doing for most of my academic research career. Trying to shed light on the ways in which constitutions, as fixed instruments across time with some variation, affect something that is very diverse and changes a whole bunch across time, which is the environment, and then the ways in which the economy kind of fits into the mixer there, because I am an economist after all, just a little bit of a different one. And then, just a quick backstory, around in the 70s, there was a split between environmental econ and ecological economics, so two fields split off from kind of one process of thinking in micro and macroeconomics. And the Reader's Digest version there is that the general environmental economics view is that the environment is part of the economy, which leads to different ways in which you use and treat the environment. And then the ecological resource, or the ecological economist folks, think about the economy as embedded within the environment. So the environment comes first and economy comes second. And I found myself more attached to that field, and it has informed my research and my background. And in terms of things that I'm doing, again, non-traditional stuff there, but the field more broadly in environmental econ and current trends would be a lot of focus on climate change adaptation and mitigation, and in particular at local, state, regional, national, and international scales.
Good morning, everybody. My history with sustainability research goes back back some time, and really to my experience as a trade negotiator with the US government, I worked on what was then called the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. And for those of you that are old enough, I don't see anybody that is so far, but you may remember that there was a very contentious election in 1992 after the trade agreement had been concluded by then President Bush. In the election, Bill Clinton, who was ultimately victorious, he said he supported NAFTA, but that it needed some supplemental or complementary agreements around labor and the environment. And at that time, those of us that were in the administration were not so excited about sort of having a whole nother negotiation to follow the trade portion. But once I left government, I kind of came around to this notion that trade and economic integration, while may be having very positive effects, may also have some downsides. And these supplemental agreements were designed to at least partially address those downsides. When I went back on my PhD, I kind of kept that theme, and I was thinking a lot about corporate social responsibility, what we call CSR, corporate social responsibility. And my girlfriend, fiance at the time, was working for the World Wildlife Fund. And this was a period where companies and non-governmental organizations began to collaborate around various sorts of CSR, sustainability initiatives. And so a lot of my early research was about corporate NGO collaboration. And then I got together with another scholar. We wrote a book called NGOs and Corporation, Conflict and Collaboration. So we were looking at both the conflictual and the contentious relationships between NGOs and companies, as well as the cooperative ones. And so that kind of was the beginning of my interest in sustainability research, or again, what we used to call CSR research. And most recently, I'm also interested in climate change adaptation, and also the role of climate risk in firm decision-making, whether it be strategy, whether it be where to locate plants and activities, or how to deal with climate change. And unfortunately, adaptation is now very much part of the mix because we're not doing as well as we might on the mitigation front. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it.
All right. Hello. Thank you so much. So we have a little bit of background of these scholars get into the field, their early research, and now obviously sort of the most pressing question perhaps is, what should we examine in the future? What are some of the really pressing research questions, people in accounting, scholars in economics, or even in business management, international business should examine? Also, I see a lot of students here. Take notes if anyone is interested in getting PhDs in the future. Those might be interesting fields to get into. I again start with Svenja to my left.
All right, so now we can come to the question, why is accounting finally, I guess, picking up on something that econ and management have been working on for a long time. And the reason is that I think accounting at its core, we look at some kind of disclosure regulation, right? For us, that is usually the starting point. If it is financial reporting, or now if it is sustainability reporting of any kind. And we did have voluntary disclosures of sustainability reports, I guess particularly rising in prominence, I think starting with the beginning of the 21st century. But the important thing is that now there's been a trend to mandate it, and usually Europe or the EU is at the forefront of those. So we've had mandated ESG reporting, sustainability reporting in the EU since I think almost 10 years. And I think, okay, before we come into all of our topics, there's one question I sometimes hear from accounting academics who don't do ESG research. The question is this just a vogue topic? Is this going to stay, right? And I'm always thinking, this is going to stay. If there's mandatory regulation, then there's a need for us to understand the consequences, how to best, I guess, design those mandates and these reporting structures, and maybe should we not have mandatory reporting, right? It's not clear whether that's in the best interest of the corporations, but also all the stakeholders involved. What are unintended consequences? So given the fact that the EU has been at the forefront, they've had the mandatory reporting since almost a decade now. The important thing is actually changing that, right? And I'm sure that accounting research at that time had informed what is good and what is not good about the accounting regulation or the non-financial reporting regulation that they had issued at that time, right? So the EU came out they actually have a new accounting regulation, or accounting regulation, non-financial reporting regulation called CSRD, which is being phased in actually in the next few years. It actually has impact on US companies as well, to the extent that US companies have substantial business in Europe, and that's a huge change to anything else that we've seen before. It doesn't matter where you're headquartered anymore. You can be headquartered in the US. If you have substantial business in Europe, you have to follow their regulation. You have to follow guidelines of issuing these mandatory ESG reports. And there's much more than this in this CSRD that has impact as well. It will require ESG assurance, which means that you have traditional auditors kind of assuring the accuracy of these ESG reports. There's also these third-party providers that are not necessarily audit firms, but that also provide independent assurance. Now, Big Four firms or audit firms generally, they're heavily regulated, right? They have to follow the strict guidelines of how an audit is supposed to be performed. We don't have any guidelines when it comes to ESG assurance. There's voluntary frameworks that these ESG assurers can follow, but they don't have to follow it. And if that's the right way to assure appropriate disclosures in a mandatory framework, has to be seen and has to be studied as well, right? And I think that's the role of accountants, to figure out the best way to mandate, to regulate, to have the most accurate disclosures possible. So we talked about mandatory ESG regulation, we talked about ESG assurance. Maybe one thing with respect to mandatory regulation or disclosure regulation, the US is trying to pick up on this as well, right? The SEC has issued their final climate-related disclosure rule in March 2024. Now, most of US scholars are still, or practitioners as well.
Okay, wow. I got a new mic. I was told my mic was not syncing with the online stream, plus I was very quiet anyways, so I hope you can hear me better now. So I'm just wrapping up. I think I've monopolized a lot of the time. Important questions. I guess ESG mandatory disclosure, definitely, even though there has been a lot of research that has been published in this area already. I think once the SEC climate disclosure rule will come into effect, if it will, it's currently litigated in court, so we'll see what happens there. There's a lot of research opportunities. One of the biggest pressing issues, I think, for Big Four firms right now is carbon accounting, because that's one big thing that they have to audit, and there's also a lot of room for manipulation, actually. And I think the last thing for us academics is just the ESG assurance space generally. With that, I pass it along.
All right, thank you. So pressing questions in my field in general would, for me, be thinking about or related to climate change adaptation and mitigation still, especially for the resource constrained, for the historically marginalized, for folks who lack autonomy to make decisions on their own, where they're really young, where they've gotten really old and they can no longer make decisions for themselves. It's really important to make those connections to those groups through climate change research, because it can often get left behind. Also, in terms of climate change research, we all get very put into a silo, I would say, and we have our disciplines and we have our very specific research. I think it's really important for climate research that you branch out and focus on interdisciplinarity. And so connecting environmental economics issues to health issues, connecting environmental economics issues to the natural sciences are all things and processes I see happening in the way in which environmental econ, ecological econ, and climate change research within the field of economics evolving in general, as I see it.
So in the management disciplines, I think for really decades, there's been this kind of intrinsic assumption that there's the potential for win-win strategies when it comes to CSR sustainability. By that I mean that firms that engage in more corporate responsibility or sustainability will reap financial benefits from those investments, either in the form of efficiencies or greater legitimacy among their stakeholders. And I think that assumption has been too heavily adopted, if you will. And there certainly are plenty of opportunities for benefits to firms from engaging in CSR sustainability, but I think it ignores some obvious trade-offs. And so building a little bit on Svenja's discussion of reporting, most recently there's been some pushback on ESG itself. So what exactly is being reported, and is it relevant? Is it really telling the story of what the impact the firm is having on societal and environmental stakeholders? And so one of the things that I've been doing in conjunction with colleagues is trying to look more directly at the actual social and environmental impacts of, in my case, international business activity. And typically that means foreign direct investment. So when firms invest in property, plant, and equipment in other countries. And in that context, the prevailing wisdom was that that's just inherently positive, that there are positive spillovers to the local economy, the local economies will benefit. And that is certainly often the case, but often there are mixed effects. And so I think we need to look more closely at both the positive and negative societal impacts of business activity generally, and in my case, foreign investment in particular, and really peel back on some of this win-win business case mentality that has been, I think, prevailed too much in the management disciplines. And I think it's this kind of pushback against ESG I actually see as a healthy thing. Because the pushback in part is saying that what is being reported may not be entirely accurate, and it may not be that relevant. And maybe we need to go beyond materiality and think not just about impacts that affect the firm directly, but impacts that the firm is having on its context, environment, and stakeholders.
All right, thank you so much. So this was actually the second question of this panel, sort of what is forward thinking, what are really some of the pressing research questions we should dedicate ourselves to as business scholars. I also want to commend all the business school scholars on the flexibility. Whatever you say about business schools, it shows that we're flexible people. And actually we're coming to the last question already, and I know this is more of a research-oriented panel, and we're talking about scholarly work, but one of the pressing questions is always about sort of bridging some of the research that we do and bringing it into the classroom for our students. And so the last question that I have is, how do we perhaps better implement some of the research that we're doing on the scholarly side and bringing it into the classroom, and perhaps also talk about maybe some of the things that we already do well, but then also some of the areas of improvement that we could implement in the future.
All right, okay. So what I guess Baruch is doing since a year, because I've implemented it, is we offer an ESG reporting and measurement course in the accounting department. That's an elective though for master students particularly. And Baruch has, I guess because they have a very tight curriculum, there's no room to kind of introduce a course like that in the undergrad curriculum, but instead their goal is to kind of infuse ESG throughout each course in the accounting major. And I think this is a wonderful idea. My previous institution actually had implemented that about, 4 or 5 years ago. The only thing that I want to caution, because that's what I realized at my previous institution where I taught Intro to Financial Accounting, is we just had an ESG reporting case study, and multiple years in a row I would get the feedback from my students that they felt like this case study, this one class, it was just one class we were supposed to teach on that, kind of felt disjoint from the rest of the semester, and they didn't quite feel how that was kind of fitting in the rest of the curriculum of the Intro to Financial Accounting class. So while I agree with that approach to kind of infuse sustainability throughout every course, to just have students introduced to it and not have them think, well, this is a nice to have, but this is part of what businesses are doing right now because that's the truth. I think it has to be more carefully integrated. So what I mean by that is I feel like if we teach Intro to Financial Accounting, I think it would be very easy. We usually talk about firms have to issue annual reports, quarterly reports, and then they might have other press releases and so forth that kind of build the entire information environment of firms. Why not just saying, guess what, there's also ESG reports, and just introducing it that way instead of making it a standalone, like a standalone class pretty much, but saying there is more to the information environment than traditionally financial reporting. Generally, if we think about contingent liabilities, there is an example of environmental remediation costs, for example. So we can bring in examples that kind of tie the core curriculum of accounting to environmentally related impacts. And I think that's the best way to do it instead of just saying, oh, by the way, there's like this afterthought of ESG. I think that's, and I'm actually tasked at Baruch to introduce ESG throughout the accounting curriculum. So that's like one of the focuses that I'm trying to look at. How can we kind of infuse it into the curriculum?